So now we'll be talking about short-term memory and serial position effect. So serial position effect, it refers to the tendency to recall the first, is the primacy effect, and the last, which is the recency effect, items in a list more easily than those in the middle. So key findings are primacy effect, stronger recall for earlier items, and recency, stronger recall for later items in sequence. Now real world example, when you are given a list of instructions or items, you are likely to remember the first and the last items better than the middle ones. Example, remembering the first and last names of people in a group but forgetting the names in the middle. Right. Now, working memory and chunking. Key concepts. Chunking is the process of grouping individual pieces of information into larger, manageable units to enhance memory capacity. Example, ability to remember a string of 10 random digits can be improved by chunking them into meaningful units, for example, a phone number. Now, real world example, telephone numbers, you might remember a phone number more easily if it's chunked into blocks rather than a single continuous string. Now, we're going to be covering memory models, Atkinson and Shiffrin. So, human memory. So, this is the slide where we'll be discussing that. So, human memory. Firstly, we'll be talking about sensory memory. So, sensory memory retains representations of sensory input for a brief period of time. So, basically, this is the workflow of how human memory works. So, this is the pipeline. You can see first, initially, what we have is an input, or which is a stimuli. So, once we get that stimuli, it enters into the sensory memory. It is encoded here, and then you see two arrows from here to here and here to here. So, whenever you have a cue, your attention goes to this. So, it goes into the short-term memory. And sensory memory, from short-term memory, if you rehearse it long enough, or a number of times, you get into long-term memory. So, this is encoding process. And in case you want to retrieve something that is stored in the long-term memory, to get it into your short-term memory, that process is retrieval. So both require rehearsal, because you have to repeat it a number of times in order to get it into that form of memory. But also they are subject to forgetting. All three types, sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory, are all subject to forgetting if in case you don't rehearse it for long enough or frequently, right? So information is transferred from a sensory memory to a short-term memory at the time of representation, which is attention, right? So we move on. Atkinson-Shiffrin model, a foundation model of memory consisting of three components. So, sensory memory briefly retains sensory input, visual, auditory, before processing. Short-term memory holds information temporarily and is susceptible to decay. Long-term memory, a more permanent store for information. Human memory model, Atkinson and Shiffrin. So, sensory memory temporarily holds sensory information, sounds, images for a very brief period. Short-term memory holds information temporarily for about 15 to 30 seconds and is limited in capacity about 7 items. Rehearsal is key for transferring information into long-term memory from short-term memory. Now, long-term memory, a more permanent storage system for memories with an almost unlimited capacity. It's where information is stored for extended periods, from hours to a lifetime. Encoding into long-term memory happens when we engage with information, repetition, rehearsal, meaningful associations. Now, memory process flow, input stimuli from the environment are processed by sensory systems. Sensory memory information briefly resides here. Attention is required to transfer information to short-term memory from the sensory memory. Then short-term memory, information is temporarily held and processed here. Rehearsal, information in short-term memory is rehearsed and encoded into long-term memory. Retrieval, information from long-term memory can be retrieved back into short-term memory whenever needed. Forgetting, information may be lost or forgotten from short-term memory unless it is rehearsed. Forgetting from long-term memory can occur over time or due to inference or maybe due to other brain problems or an accident, right? Now we move on to sensory memory, iconic and echoic. So key concepts, iconic memory is basically brief retention of visual image after image, and echoic memory, brief retention of auditory stimuli, auditory after effects. So key findings, both iconic and echoic memories hold information for short periods, 500 to 800 milliseconds. Sensory input is retained for a very brief duration before being either processed into short-term memory or discarded. Now, real-world example, visual memory, when you quickly glance at a scene and you can recall the details even after the image disappears. Example, looking at a street sign and remembering it after you pass it. Auditory memory, hearing someone's voice calling your name even after the sound has faded away. So that's it about this video.